Great, so really good to welcome everyone back for this session, and really delighted to have Mark and Jon here with me. We've only got half an hour, so we're going to try and keep the answers punchy and really try and get through as many topics as we can. So no pressure for Jon and Mark. If I start to look agitated, they know when to stop. As you will know, questions can be shared through the virtual means, and I'll keep an eye on them throughout the session and try and weave in as many responses to questions that you might have as I can. So please do share them as we go through the session, and we'll try and cover as much as we can. So if I can kick straight off, Mark, I'll come to you first. So as CEO of Aviva Investors, you're clearly having to really look quite hard at what you as an investor can do to address the climate challenge and accelerate progress towards net zero. So to get us going, can you say a few of the really practical things that Aviva Investors is doing?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. Aviva signed up to net zero 2040, so that's the most ambitious of all insurance companies. The focus, obviously, for Aviva is its own operations. And 2030 is when they want to get their own operations to net zero. The assets of Aviva are much harder to get to net zero, so that's why it's 2040 overall as a target, and that is really, really tough. So what are we doing, Aviva Investors, the asset manager, to help Aviva get to net zero? What we have to do is we have to get all the assets to net zero, and it's not. We're not going to do that by selling the brown ones and just buying green ones. What we do is we engage directly with corporates. We engage with them, we have meetings, we do voting, we try and get them to sign up to science-based targets in order to actually get them on the road to net zero. We run property, so we actually are the owners and management of buildings, so we have to actually control those ourselves. We have to get those to net zero ourselves by making them more energy efficient, etc. And then another part of the huge focus, because even that's not going to be enough, is policy change. And that's what we call macro stewardship. And that's trying to change the whole system that we operate within, trying to work with governments, get policy in place to actually encourage that route to net zero for all corporates and banks, etc., that we rely on. So micro, macro stewardship is the big areas of focus.
Fantastic. Jon, can you share a bit more in terms of how PKA's approach compares with what Aviva Investors is doing?
I think in many ways it's the same approach. PKA has been working with the green transformation for more than a decade. So it all started out by us doing actual investments in wind farms and solar farms across the world. So we've done that for more than 10 years now. And then besides that, we have a lot of other assets, of course, that we have to look into. And I do agree with Mark that divesting is not the right way to do things. I think it's important to engage. And we do engage through networks, because even though PKA is a quite large pension fund in Denmark, it's not a large pension fund in the world. So we have to join together with others, the Avivas of this world and others. So we do that in Climate Action 100+. We have signed up to pretty much every single network that you can, IIRGCs, PIII, Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, GFANs, and whatever you call it, just to push ourselves again and again to try to decarbonize our portfolio. And we have a set target, not by 2040, but by 2025, we want to decarbonize our portfolio with 30%.
So I'd like to pick up on that portfolio decarbonisation bit to start with. There's been a bit of a debate around portfolio decarbonisation versus how you can take action to achieve economy-wide decarbonisation, which clearly ultimately is the thing that we need to do. I think you both alluded to that in the collaborative efforts of how do you get system change. But thinking about the kind of actions that you're taking within your own portfolios, what are your expectations of companies, and what kind of things do you look for that give you a signal that that particular company or that part of the portfolio is on track? Mark, if I can come to you first.
Sure. Well, I'll just start with the oil gas mining sector as a great example. It accounts obviously for the largest amount of carbon emissions globally. We wrote to the top 30 carbon emitters over a year ago, and we told them if they don't sign up to net zero with science-based targets or equivalent, with interim steps that are clearly measurable, then we will divest. We've given them 3 years because it's not an easy ask to do. And I'm pleased to say that sort of 50% of them are really getting on board. You know, only one, BP, has actually signed up to net zero today, but there are 50% really working hard to get on board, and 50% I'll call laggards. But we will be divesting some of them, almost certainly, and that's a financial decision. They're going to be the long-term losers for our customer portfolio. So this is a financial decision. It's not sort of altruistic particularly. That's the oil and gas sector. We will be rolling that out, that kind of logic, to other sectors over time, but that's the big focus for us today.
Jon, how about you?
So I would say it's twofold. For one part, we joined the Climate Action 100 Plus. I think they address the 168 biggest emitters of the world, some 80% or something of the world's carbon emission. And then they are supposed to, it should have been this year, 2022, but it's 2023. They will, report back how these companies actually have made plans, strategies for decarbonization. And of course, that's very important for us. And then the other part is that there are many companies as part of our portfolio. We look into how do they actually plan for this? Do they do things? Are incentives correct? Are they aligned with the decarbonization? And I think very often, and also today, I think we discuss data, how complex it is, but I think we shouldn't overcomplicate it. I think it's actually easy to see whether a company does something or not. We can decide that, and we can decide that as PKA, and then we try to engage through the proxy voters of this world, Hermes, or the Climate Action 100 Plus, and so on, to make sure that we have enough power behind us to actually make these companies that is a little bit lacking of doing the change actually do make the changes needed.
And what kind of things do you look for in terms of that transition piece? Are there some specific things that you would recommend for those in the corporate community in the room to really be making sure that they're doing in presenting to and engaging with their investor base?
I think, first of all, you need to have plans, and you need to make them public, so that we as investors can see that they have a plan for the transition. And I know it's a tough call. I mean, you might tell your competitors what you're doing, and it might be, something from a strategic point of view. It might be important for you to not tell everybody, but we need it as investors. And then we need incentives, management incentives, and then where we are now, I mean, you should already have made a plan. Not everybody has, but if you have made a plan, now we really want to see concrete actions. So follow up year on year. And I think that's pretty much the same framework that all the different networks and what we do individually, it's around that we sort of focus.
Yeah.
One of the GFAN's initiatives is actually to create a template for the transition plan. Aviva's published a transition plan earlier this year, so it certainly can be done. But the key for transition plans is that you have the short-term targets as well as the long-term. The 2050 target isn't good enough. It has to have 25 and 2030 target as well. We want it put to the vote at the AGM as well, so it actually we can actually hold companies accountable for the ongoing delivery. But yeah, once you've got a plan, that's just step one. Then people like us are going to hold companies to account every single year. Are you on track with the plan? So it's just the beginning of quite a long journey.
And are you, within your own transition plan and the development there, are there any sort of tips or lessons or particular challenges that you faced in developing it?
Yeah, I think you need the plan to evolve over time. So you can't do a plan now, and that's just going to be the plan forever. So I think Aviva called its plan one, on the basis that next year's plan is going to be more refined, because we actually don't have the answers today for a lot of the questions. So, for example, sovereign portfolio. How do you determine if an Indonesian sovereign bond is net zero or aligned to net zero? So there's a lot of work still needing to be done, and So keeping abreast of the current science is a critical part of every single plan.
Now, one of the things that there's been quite a lot of focus on recently is culture, and how do you bring your organisations and the wider finance community along. So how do you, and whether there is indeed a skills gap in this area. So there's a huge and quite rapid shift and growth. So how are you both tackling that skills gap and also the question of organisational culture and really enabling everyone in the organisation to come along? Mark, if you...
Yeah, so ESG has become much more obviously mainstream across the whole of the finance sector. We've got dedicated 36 ESG professionals across the team. But what we've done now, we've embedded them throughout all the different areas of the business. And actually what's happening is even a portfolio manager of equities is becoming an ESG specialist. So, having ESG on your business card is sort of one of the best ways to get promoted these days. So I think there are going to have to be much more degrees and education to bring people through with finance and the climate science, because a lot of the people's backgrounds is one or other, and then you learn the other along the way. But I think more and more degree courses are actually going to be targeted much more for sustainable finance, which is absolutely what the city needs, let alone corporates as well.
Well, I mean, in PKA, we represent 360,000 health and social care workers in Denmark, 90% women. So there's been a push on the PKA management from the beginning to know, please invest our money as good as you can and give us a high pension, but do it in a good way. And by that, it's been something that's been part of the narrative of PKA for many, many years. So the team, the ESG team I have, has been working in PKA for more than a decade now. So it's very integrated. But I mean, the important thing here is maybe it takes time. You need resources and competences, and you need to learn. And we have done it for a while, so I feel it's very integrated in everything we do. We also are a very small company, even though we have $60 billion under management. I mean, it's a fairly small company, so I can reach out to every employee and make sure that they are focused on the right thing. But it takes time. So, I mean, it's start working with it. That's at least a message I will give away, because it's not going to come by itself. You just have to work and work and work, and then it will be an integrated part of your company in a few years.
And where do you see the biggest barriers at the moment in terms of things that you're really having to work on, or whether within the organisation or as part of some of those collaborations or the regulatory change?
I mean, I think right now there's a lot of ESG bashing going on in the press and politicians, etc. So I think what's happening is all the words being used in the land of ESG are all sort of getting misused or used to represent almost everything going on. And in particular, the Ukraine-Russia crisis has caused oil and gas stocks to grow in value, and some funds which have excluded fossil fuel investments. So those are ethical funds. It's not ESG investing. That's ethical choice that funds have made. They write that on the label. Haven't benefited from oil and gas share prices growing, and therefore they've massively underperformed traditional benchmarks. And so that's being used as sort of this weapon that ESG investing is dead and is wrong, and so on. But it's just actually a whole misunderstanding of what actually is going on. So I'm on the Investment Association, I'm on the board there, and I chair their Sustainable and Responsible Investing Committee. And the focus with the FCA is on labelling, to actually make clear labels. What is responsible investing? What is impact investing? What is ethical investing? So exclusions of things are ethical. And you need to make it very clear for consumers what they're buying. And I think that's the problem at the moment. There's just people don't understand what they're actually buying. So that's the biggest greenwashing risk I have. It's not what we say is not in our prospectus. It's that the consumer just didn't really understand what they bought.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly from the work that we do, one of our networks is an asset owners network with pension fund chairs, and you've definitely seen that. Initially it was how can I get the asset managers I'm working with to even put this on the agenda, but now it's shifted to how can I tell which of these various different products that everyone's trying to sell me actually have an impact and are actually trying to do what I want them to do. What kind of challenges do you see, John?
First of all, I think it's important that we talk about the challenges, but I was just start to mention, I think that every company can do something. They don't need to set up a lot of challenges to do something. We can actually do something, everybody. But some of the key challenges that we see is that, first of all, as we also heard in the last session, is that there's a lot of different networks. So, there's GFANS, Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, Net Zero Banking Alliance, IIDCC, and so on. It's blooming out. So what we see now is there are so many alliances, which one to pick, where should I go, where do I get the best input? And I do believe if you're new in this area, it's a bit complicated. I do understand. But from my point of view, just join whatever one. I'm sure you will get something from it. And then I also think that what we see now is that in the finance sector and corporates in general are running ahead of regulators. So if there are any regulators here, and this is not Denmark, so now I can say it, you have to step up. We really need you to do something. I would surely like something like a carbon emission tax, at least in Europe, if we could do that, and hopefully in all of the OECD countries or something like that. Really, that's the next big step that we need, and I see that as a challenge for us as investors, because polluting with carbon and other stuff is not really in part of the finance system. We knew how to deal with the market, so give us the market.
And in the absence of some of that regulation, clearly part of that is about, comes into the politics of it, and you can see where some action has been taken, then there has been quite a lot of pushback, which links into one of the other areas that is really key, which is around the whole question of a just transition. And how do you make sure that as you transition away from certain industries, particularly in the current context where there is such pressure on livelihoods and the cost of living, how are you both incorporating some of those considerations into the decisions you're taking, and what kind of questions are you asking companies in terms of just transition? Mark?
Yeah, so we write every year to all the corporates we invest into, so 1,634, I think, letters this year. And we told them, that we need them to have a transition plan. We set out what it needs to look like. We said we want a biodiversity policy as well, because everything is completely interlinked. And then we expect their transition plan to be a just one, actually to care about the communities as well, because if you don't take swathes of the community with you, as you start shutting down industries, for example, then you're going to lose all the votes, and the politicians aren't going to enable the carbon tax, which is the ultimate dream that we need to happen in the economy. Once we do get some globally coordinated carbon tax coming in, phased in, so it doesn't impact corporates immediately, then capitalism is just going to take care of the issue for us, frankly. But we are so far away from the politicians being able to do that, and we need the just transition so that society is really looked after as we go through. And the governments have a massive role to play here, a massive role.
Now I'm going to start bringing in some of the audience questions. So I'm going to start with the first one around the recent talk around the relevancy of ESG scores. So John, maybe I could come to you on this one first, of how do you actually use ESG ratings? How do you incorporate them into the process that you follow? And also some of the wider steps that you might take to really take decisions that do reflect whether it is around climate, but also some of the broader sustainability and environmental factors.
So we do buy ESG data on every company that we do invest in, and we get that. There are several suppliers. I won't mention the specific ones. I think they're pretty known, and we incorporate that, and then we have sort of weighted. So we have this investment, this much, this amount, and their ESG score is like this, and then we try to rank every company that we invest in, and by that we have found the top ones that we have to focus on. And this is an impact hunt, so we go for the biggest first, and then we engage, and we see whether we do engage with them through Climate Action 100+, or through some of the other things that we are part of. And so it is integrated, and we have ranked every single company in our portfolio with the ESG score. And I do appreciate that, there's a lot of discussions whether data is correct, and it is true, and we have actually bought the data from 2 different companies, and it's not the same. But I mean, it's a beginning, and it's also important just to start working with it. So, when we have to take actions and decisions, we look at it and say, okay, can this be right? But we start by using the data to sort of, from a broader perspective, to look into where to start.
And do you use it both to think through where some of the opportunities for investment might be as well as the risks, or is it more on the risk side of the equation?
It's more on the risk side, but it's also back to our strategy, which are more passive and with some tilts towards, could be value or low volatility or whatever. So we are sort of a passive investor when we are investing in listed stocks. Yeah.
So we also buy data, and absolutely spot on. Though you buy it from different people, you get a different answer. Yeah. And actually, you can literally look at a corporate and have a completely different buy-sell signal if you just relied on the data as it stands. So we have then a huge subjective overlay that goes on top, because I think just relying on the data is not a good investment strategy today. You have to have that overlay. And actually, the overlay can be trying to find areas that we can engage with a corporate. It might signal, look, there's something here. Let's go and engage with that corporate, see if we can find out what's going on and actually get them to move. So, yes, it definitely allows opportunities as well as just the risks.
And what would you recommend for companies then in terms of trying to understand how their own investor relations strategy can respond to, and which they should engage in terms of the ratings processes, which they shouldn't, because I think it's a huge challenge for companies, and often, particularly given a lot of it is in a black box, or they don't even really know what kind of questions are being asked, and therefore how they can effectively respond.
And we're going to need standards. We're going to need consistency of this. So so that's sort of where we need to get to. I think just disclosure. The more disclosure, the better. Frankly, I mean that's how this works from our perspective. And a lot of disclosure today is the carbon emissions last year, which is great because it can tell us sort of how we're tracking, but it's not actually necessarily a future indicator. So that's where the transition plans come in, because that's where we can actually start to do forward-looking projections, which is really what asset management is about, is trying to work out who's going to be the winners and losers going forward.
Yeah. So another question, in terms of the most effective C-suite incentive schemes on ESG, I think what have each of you seen in terms of some of the companies that you might be investing in? But also be interested for your own organisations, how is ESG integrated into the compensation schemes? Mark, if I start with you.
Yeah, so it's in the bonus structure, but in particularly answering this question for the C-suite, it's in the long-term incentive plan. So I think it's 15% of the long-term incentive plan is linked to sustainability goals. There's about 4 of them. One of them being just the carbon reduction targets that have been set out for 2025. So it's looking at that interim step. But there's many other ESG metrics, including diversity on the board, on Exco and stuff within all that. And that is effectively what we ask all of the corporates we invest into to do similar things to that. And that's also part of the letter and the engagement that we have with them regularly.
Well, I come from Denmark, and in Denmark and in many Danish pension companies, we have actually gone away from bonuses. So the C-suite doesn't have any bonus. But we do something else. Together with our board, we decide targets. So they are like 3 or 5 years away. And then, of course, we have to show that we are able to meet these targets. So that's the way that we do it internally in PKA. We think that bonuses sometimes can, pull you away from, what is the good decision today and what is the good decision tomorrow. But that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah. But we set targets, and we've done that for many years, and we are now also very open about those targets. So the 30% that we are going to decarbonize our portfolio by 2025 is something that we disclose to everybody. And I'm sure the press is going to be right at me if I don't make it. So my board will know if I'm not on the right track. They can just open the newspapers and they will know.
Yeah. One of the biggest sticks we have on corporates is we get to vote on the board positions. So actually voting against the election of the nomination committee chair is immensely powerful for bringing this sort of stuff to bear, because you make it personal. This actually will affect the non-exec director's job if they don't get re-elected, and and this is their career, their second career or whatever. So you actually do have quite a lot of say using your vote on election of directors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just one, in case people are interested, certainly coming back to that question of remuneration, one of the companies in our CFO leadership network, DSM, I think is one of the most interesting in terms of really pushing forward for a company that does use incentives. I think 50% of short and long term is connected to their sustainability targets. So worth a look if you haven't looked at already. Now we're nearly out of time. I'm going to sneak in one more very quick fire question for both of you, and then I'd like you both to just share a final closing thought. So one of the questions that did pop up when we were looking through the audience questions was touching on offsetting. So how are both of you dealing with or thinking about offsetting? So Mark, maybe if I can just ask you the offsetting question, maybe Jon, something slightly different for you, and then we can close.
Yeah, so to get to net zero, we need all the corporates to get to net zero, but they're not all going to get to net zero, right? Quite clearly, not by 2040. So, what are we going to do about that? That's where we will have changed the portfolio into a lot of assets which are already there. So we will have increased the weighting almost certainly to green solution type companies. But then we also investing in nature-based solutions. And we will be investing in technology-based solutions and the hydrogen economy, etc. So nature-based solutions actually, if you can get proper carbon sinks, then that is, that's a good offset. And there are offset schemes out there that aren't really that credible right now. So again, corporates that use offsetting schemes that aren't, properly robust and externally validated, we're going to be calling them out.
Different question, Jon, for you as the final thing from the audience questions. There was something there around advice that you would give on the kind of commitments that you would look for. So what makes a credible commitment? There's obviously science-based targets initiative, which is one of the ones that a lot of organisations would look to. Are there some things that you could advise in terms of where companies can go to make sure that the commitments they make are credible?
Well, I don't know whether that's what you're asking for, but I think, we have in Europe the disclosure, the EU disclosure and taxonomy. And I think, if you just start to follow that, it's a very good beginning. So it's a good start. And we have the TCFD, we have science-based. I don't think it's that important. The exact framework, we are just in the beginning of deciding which frameworks are the ones that are going to, be the ones. But the important thing is that you start doing something.
Yeah. Great. So we've got just over a minute left. So I'm going to ask each of you just to share your final sort of closing remarks. If there's a single tangible action that you would want organisations to be taking to accelerate progress towards tackling climate change, what would that action be, Mark?
Okay, so we can't rely on technological solutions. That's probably my big message. We'd need to build a 1 million carbon removal plant every 2 days for the next 30 years in order to do that. We do about two to three a year globally so far. So technology is not going to be the answer. We have to reduce energy demand. That's absolutely critical. So improving efficiency, and there's huge ways corporates can do this. We now then need to change the use of oil and gas across all corporates so that we're using electricity or hydrogen, depending on what works, and every single industry is going to be completely different to the answer there. And then at the end of all that, transition plans required, which will then remove the remaining carbon, and at the end of that, it's nature-based solutions. So, any of the above, please.
Nothing ambitious there. Jon?
I think I'll go for something less ambitious then. I think every company, everybody here knows something that they can do in their company to, decarbonize just a little bit. Go do that this year. Get it done. If everybody does that, then we're going to move along. That's the way that PKA did it many years ago, and year on year we sort of evolved, and I also think that's one of the key successes in Denmark, because we're such a small community, and we actually succeeded in many ways, being sort of the leading producer of wind turbines and other stuff. We're only 6 million people. How could that be? It started out by just doing something, and then doing something, and doing something. So that's my advice.
So set an ambitious goal, set near-term, long-term targets,
Yes.
embed into
Yep.
remuneration, incentives, and keep going.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much. Lots of food for thought for everyone. And so we can conclude the session and hand over to the next panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.